welcome you all to the third segment of lecture number 7. And in this video, in this segment, we will be looking at Britain's foreign policy. So, in fact, throughout 17th, 18th, 19th century, Britain has been adopting a Fairfield no favor approach, where it states that it is adopting a non-discriminatory policies where it will not distinguish between Britain's goods and other countries' goods, wherein if it is seeking for access to market in some other territory, it is seeking on behalf of other capital exporting countries. So it sort of gave a lot of significance to the laissez-faire approach, and it was not embroiled into the question of whether one particular investor had to be promoted. So Britain's policies were non-discriminatory. It was trying to open up the markets for everybody, not just for Britain merchants and Britain investors. So Britain eventually, what it started doing was it started distinguishing between commercial concessions. I mean, it was only protecting the concessions rather than promoting a particular investor. So even among the concession, it started making a categorization whether it is a commercial concession or it is a strategic concession. So if it was just a commercial concession, then the Britain adopted a non-interventionist laissez-faire approach. But if it was a strategic concession, Britain did not shy away from using force in order to afford protection to that concession as well. So this is how the Britons sort of promoted a Fairfield no favor approach. We could see the Britain Foreign Office also adopted this approach. In fact, when there's a partnership between Britain, the government, and the private companies, East India Company, Dutch East India Company, all of them was with regard to strategic concessions. So after 18th and 19th century, we would see a web of arrangements had taken place wherein the Europe's political as well as commercial influence can be seen in non-European countries as well, right? So if we look at David Maclean had commented, or he had remarked on the approach of Britain Foreign Office. So what he stated was, Britain takes a proactive role in opening up the market of a territory, but once the market is open for foreign investors, then what we see here is Britain retires from the scene. That is what David Maclean says. Please look at what the exact words of David Maclean. So he stated that where the universal benefits of free trade seem to be obstructed by the forces of ignorance or backwardness, the British government then might exert itself to open up the new areas for mercantile endeavour. But when the new openings for trade, commerce and finance have been made, then the government sought only to retire from the scene. So the official abstention from the commercial and financial affairs overseas was the basis for Foreign Office thinking in the mid-19th century. Apparently in mid-19th century, this was what the mantra for Britain Foreign Office. So wherever the role of discreet intervention within the context of informal imperialism, freedom from formal obligation, that was it, freedom from formal obligation was actually the undisputed role. So we could see that the Britain sort of retiring from the scene after opening up the market for all of them, all merchants and all investors, not just for Britain investor. But that didn't stop Britain from taking a proactive step or use its force for protecting foreign investment. For instance, look at Delagoa Bay Railway case. In this case, there was a territory, Delagoa Bay, in East Africa, which is under Portuguese control. Now, a concession to build railway in that territory was granted to an American citizen, McMurdo. So McMurdo was an American citizen who got a concession to build railways in a Portuguese controlled territory in Africa. But he established a company in London. The company was called Delagoa Bay and East African Railway Company. He established a company in London. So he sourced the capital for financing that railway project from London. So the capital was sourced from London and that was invested in in building the railway. So even for completing the work, he had to take numerous extensions from the Portuguese government. But as soon as that was completed, then Portuguese government wanted to lay down railway for another 9 kilometers, and that a very short period of time was given. Eventually, when the company could not meet that short time period for laying down the extra 9 kilometers, then Portuguese government confiscated the project and it completed the railway line work. Now, this was something that Britain classified as a strategic concession. Why? Because that railway line could be used by French and German traders, so it would become a very crucial trade route for French and Germany, right? So what Britain did was, Britain asserted the diplomatic pressure. Britain and US asserted diplomatic pressure, but we could see Germany backing the Portuguese, and at that point of time, Britain had to send naval ships to Delagoa Bay, and after that was done, then the matter was referred to arbitration. In fact, compensation was even awarded for the Britain investors. So that is what had happened in Delagoa Bay case. Even in the context of Sicilian sulfur monopoly case, there was sulfur mining where many investors from many countries had invested in the kingdom of two Sicilies. But eventually what the kingdom did was, the kingdom decided to grant monopoly to a French company. So many investors were affected, including Britain investors. So what here Britain did was, Britain again wrote a diplomatic letter to Prince Casero and stated that the actions granting monopoly of the kingdom to French company destroyed the confidence in commercial relations with the kingdom, and that if the kingdom does in such a way, then the countries will not have faith in investing capital in the kingdom when there is a risk of arbitrary and sudden deprivation of the capital. So, a diplomatic letter was sent, but even then nothing was sorted out with the diplomatic letter. So then Britain had to send its naval ship. Then after sending the naval ship, we did see that kingdom suspended the French monopoly and agreed to send the matter to a commission. Commission was established to hear British claims, as well as compensation was also awarded. So what we see here is, Britain did not shy away from using its force in order to afford protection to foreign investment. That was not it. But all these while in the 19th century, it was following a non-discriminatory policy. In fact, even DCM Platt, he had also written that Britain sort of adopted a non-discriminatory policies. Even when it had to use force, it had to use force on behalf of all the countries to open up the market, on behalf of all the countries to colonize the territory. So, it's very interesting what DCM Platt says. Quite apart from the competition of the emergent industrial nations, revived protectionism was a new and dangerous element which threatened the exclusion of British trade from existing and prospective markets. This and the transformation in the character of continental financial diplomacy could often find no satisfactory answer other than significant acquisitions of land. So, it was in the name of equal favor and open competition that His Majesty government was compelled on occasion simply to apply diplomatic pressure at others to colonize, and at others still to reach an international compromise whereby underdeveloped nations were divided into spheres of interest or influence. So, what we see is, around 18th and 19th century, Britain took an active role on behalf of other capital exporting countries to open up markets, and to acted on behalf of the protecting foreign investment of all capital exporting countries. This has been the official policy, Britain's official policy of the Britain Foreign Office. So, this is how Britain sort of undertook a leadership role in terms of international trade and as well as international investment regime as well. So, it had emerged as a leader for international trade regime as well as international investment regime by adopting a non-discriminatory policy. So, with that I conclude the third segment. In the next segment, we will see a quick summary or recap of the evolution of investment protection standards. Thank you.